yeah, to my shame, I've been a horrible, violent animal. And now I've got to talk about it in front of people that I don't know and just expose my innermost horrible things. And I have to remember those things. And for me, I find it painful. I hate doing it. I don't like doing it at all. But I will continue to do it so we can get to the good part.
Why do you do it?
So we can get to the gospel and try and attempt to show people the contrast between the dark and the light and what Christ has really, really done for me.
Awesome.
But sometimes I think I hear people and they almost glorify, it comes across glorifying their past. I'm ashamed of it. I really am.
Yeah, well, I'm so thankful for your bravery to be able to come out and talk about all these things that you did. And, you know, I was trying to figure out your accent because you grew up in so many different parts of the world. You were born, was it in Scotland, then you lived in South Africa, and then you spent the majority of your life in the UK.
Yeah.
How did that all kind of happen?
Well, when I was 3, we emigrated to South Africa. We lived in...
From Scotland?
From Scotland. We lived in a very poor area called Maryhill. And it was a new opportunity. My dad had docked in Durban when he was in the Merchant Navy, liked it, and so he took me and my mum when I was 3 for this new life in South Africa. I grew up there. It was amazing with the sea and the sand and the sun. I had a really good life as a child. Mum and dad seemed to be happy. My dad was a policeman. My little brother was born, and things seemed to be going really, really well. But then when I was 10, my mum had to return to the UK really quickly because my grandfather had terminal cancer.
Right.
And they said to my mum, you have to come home now. So she came back to the UK with my little brother, and I stayed in South Africa with my dad.
With your dad.
And the plan was that we would be reunited either by moving to the UK or my mum coming back to South Africa. But my dad, unfortunately, had other plans, and he was having an affair with a woman at work. And he locked me in our flat one day when I was 10. He said to me, you know, be a brave boy, you're 10 now, you're a man.
Wow.
If it gets dark, put yourself to bed. And off he went, and he left, and he never came back.
Just left you in this...
He just locked me in and left, and he went off with this woman. And maybe he would have come back, but on the 4th day, some friends who I'm still in touch with today.
For 3 days, 3 nights.
3 days, 3 nights.
10 years old.
Hadn't eaten for a few days and
Wow.
was really upset and crying. But some friends phoned the flat, and I don't remember this, but they say I answered in a bit of a distressed state. I do remember the door being broken open, and they helped me to stay with them and return to the UK, where my grandparents, both my granddad and grandma, died quite quickly. And my mum obviously had the news that my father didn't want us back. So we were moved to a housing estate on the outskirts of Glasgow, which was known as the roughest housing estate in Europe at the time.
Yeah.
That was a big contrast for me, because in South Africa you're brought up with respect and manners for your elders, and I was put into an environment where I saw other kids my age sniffing glue, taking drugs, carrying blades and being prepared to use them. That was my first encounter with violence. And violence in that community was a means to get respect. You earned respect with violence.
Right.
And I discovered I had an ability to take a punch, because I took quite a few punches, and an ability to fight. And I got into martial arts, and I had a bit of a rough start to my life back in my own country, where I felt like a foreigner. Then a few years later, we moved down to Liverpool, and the whole ball game started again. But I was a bit more wise this time. So I grew up through school, really getting into trouble. I'm sorry to tell you, I broke into factories and stole things, and I didn't have that father figure, you know.
Yeah, now tell me about that, because in the book you write about how you lost respect for him, but also a disdain for the police began at a young age. Why did that happen?
I really hated the police, because back there in that rough housing estate, I saw a lot of women getting beaten by drunken husbands. And the police would turn up, and the woman would be there with a broken nose or a black eye, and the police would just wash their hands with it and say, it's a domestic. Back in the day, if it was between husband and wife within a marriage, the police very, very rarely intervened. And there were a few times growing up where I had to intervene and help neighbours who were beaten by husbands, and fighting grown men at the age of 14. I just didn't like the police, and that was just my crazy mentality.
Okay.
And so by the time I left school, I was only good at fighting and playing rugby. I wasn't good enough to be a pro, so that's when really my life of crime would then take another level.
Yeah, and it escalated. It wasn't like you were this little kid and all of a sudden you got into this crazy lifestyle. Reading through the book, it just, you see it grow and get deeper, deeper and heavier, and you got involved with, was it the Maltese?
The Maltese Mafia.
Mafia?
Yeah, they would run most of Soho. Soho in London is the red light district.
Oh, okay.
My uncles were working for them, running peep shows and brothels and all sorts of strip bars. And I began to work for them because I just wanted money, Joe, you know. I got married at a young age and divorced.
Divorced, yeah.
Became a single parent at a young age.
Wow.
I joined a motorcycle gang called the Nomads, looking for brotherhood. And my life was definitely spiraling and the escalation was increasing in terms of violence. I began to work as a bouncer. I worked in some of the roughest nightclubs in Manchester, in Burnley and Blackburn, across the northwest of England. I worked with a team of Special Forces soldiers, ex-Special Forces soldiers, and we would be sent to nightclubs where they had lost control. They put us in there to regain control, so the level of violence increased in my life.
Is that where you're wearing like the body armor and
Yeah.
protection to go in?
We would wear shin pads and what they call cricket boxers, and we would wear stab-proof vests and carry truncheons and knuckle dusters, and we were very, very violent to stamp out more violence of drug dealers. So we kind of had this form of that we were the sheriffs, you know, and we weren't going to take any nonsense. But that would lead me then into training to become a bodyguard. I worked for a short time with people like the Rolling Stones,
Yeah, yeah.
AC/DC, REM, Neil Diamond, these kind of people, movie premieres, and I thought I was a big important man at that point.
Wow.
But behind the scenes, I was remarried again and had 2 kids, and behind the scenes, I was now working for gangsters, because in those circles, in those rock and roll circles, there's a lot of money. And those people, really, the guys at the top, they don't like to get their hands dirty. So they would employ me and my men. We would be the ones to come and find you if you were stupid enough to have stolen money from them. So I had this dual personality going on. On one side, I believed I was a good man. I loved my wife and kids, and I didn't drink or do drugs. I didn't beat her up or, you know. And on the other side, I was going out and putting a balaclava on and kidnapping men now and holding them hostage and beating them in horrible ways. And I really, I feel like I've got blood on my hands, you know.
I'm trying to put the man that I see in front of me and connecting him to the man I read about in the book. And it's so hard to reconcile. It's unbelievable the change that has come in your life. And here you are, you're in prison for the 3rd time. And tell me about your Nigerian friend.
It was amazing, serving 5 years in prison. I met this Nigerian guy who was a Christian, and that was the one thing I didn't like about him. But he insisted for 4 months that I come to the Bible study. And one day I changed my mind because he shared with me something really important.
That's right.
He said that the pastor brings in cake and coffee and biscuits. And I thought, wow.
In prison, that's an upgrade.
Yeah. I said, why didn't you share that with me before? I went along to this Bible study with the intention of stealing as much coffee as I could. But I was impacted by 12 other prisoners there who sat back in their chairs and began to sing. And I remember looking at the words of the song sheet. It was called Open the Eyes of My Heart, Lord. And I just felt in that moment I was going to cry. And I cried. I hid my face behind the paper. I didn't want them to see me crying. The next day, that guy, Tony, his name was, he lives in Vancouver now.
Oh, wow.
We're still in touch. He gave me a Bible. I reluctantly took it. And that night, I opened the Bible and I read from the book of Ezekiel.
Now, you did something that we normally don't encourage. You just opened up the Bible and went, here.
I didn't know where to begin.
Yeah.
And I opened up kind of almost in the middle. My Bible almost fell open at the middle in Ezekiel. And I read something, which is where I take the title of the book, If a Wicked Man. I read, but if a wicked man turns away from all the wickedness that he has committed, and if he does what is just and right, he can save his life. And a little bit further down, God says that he can give you a new heart and a new spirit if you repent. And I wanted a new heart and new spirit. I didn't know about Jesus. At that point, I didn't want Jesus. I wanted a new heart and a new spirit, Joe. But I found out the only way is through Christ. And that prison chaplain, he shared the gospel with me in such a simple way. As a criminal, he spoke to me about the law. He used the law to capture me there.
Very smart.
He said, you were in court, you stood before a judge. The judge found you guilty, you went to prison. One day you're going to stand before God on Judgment Day. Will you be guilty or innocent, John? How many lies have you told in your life? And he took me through a few of the 10 Commandments.
So applicable, yeah.
And I said, I'm guilty. He said, well, heaven or hell. It's as simple as that. I said, I think I'm headed to hell. he asked me, does that not concern you? And then he said to me, you know, if a rich man came and paid your fine in court, the judge could set you free. Well, when Jesus Christ went to that cross, he paid your fine. And after 3 days, it's like he wrote a check for your life, and after 3 days, the check cleared. And a legal transaction takes place in heaven. God can legally dismiss the case against you because Jesus paid your fine, if only you're willing to put your faith and trust in him. Well, I'll tell you, Joe, I did that in that prison.
Wow.
And he gave me a new heart and new spirit.
I love that, because you say you found freedom behind bars, and now God is taking you all over the world. And I love when you said you're sitting on a plane and somebody says, hey, why are you going to Canada, or why are you going to Africa? What's your answer to them? You say, I'm going?
Well, I say, well, I'm going to some of the toughest prisons on the planet. I'm a former violent criminal that was involved in
beside you on a plane for 7 hours, they can't go anywhere.
They're stuck, you know. I've got them for 7 hours, so I'm going to gently share the gospel with them.
Yeah.
But I love sharing the gospel on aeroplanes. It's one of the best places to do it, because you're trapped.
That's right.
You know. But yeah, today I've been over, by God's grace, I'm married now to Carolyn, and I have a home and family, and things that I didn't deserve, you know. By his grace and glory, I've traveled to about 25 countries. I speak in some of the toughest prisons on this planet, and it's a privilege and honor to go in there and share with the guys. And I also train and equip Christians in evangelism, because, you know, I discovered 98% of Christians in the West don't share their faith. That really bothers me.
It's a bad stat.
And so I want to change that, and I'm working alongside churches with an incredible training program to equip Christians to get out there and share their faith as well.
You know, in our last minute together, if somebody is watching this interview today and they happen to be, you know, flipping through the channels and they hear this guy with this incredible backstory, what would you say to a person who's maybe not to the same degree of where you were, but they're lost and they're away from God and they're angry and they're full of hate and violence? What would you say to that person who's watching today? I
would just say that I was amongst the most violent of people. I had no heart. I was willing to murder, as you'll read in the book. I was so lost, but I found God. I found that God is real. I looked at this world and I saw the mess it's in. I saw the mess we're in. And I knew in that moment that there was a creator. I saw it in design. I looked at a building, I knew there was an architect. I looked at a painting, I know there was a painter. And in that moment in my cell, I realized there was a God. And I tell you, I don't know who you are or what you've done, but I know that if God can forgive a violent animal like me, then he can forgive you. Amen. And all you have to do is, in faith, trust that he's there, search for him, repent, and surrender your life to Jesus Christ. And I promise you, his word says he give you a new heart and new spirit. I'm living proof that that happens. And I'm so glad that you said you can't reconcile the man in the book to the man today, because my wife said the very same thing. She said, I can't imagine that violent man as my husband. And for me, that's the greatest testimony.